start off visiting those counseling foundations where we recognize that the foundations, the very basics of counseling, that's what we build our practice on. And one of those foundations, no matter what modality you're practicing, is some form of non-judgmental way of being, a non-judgmental attitude. But it's tricky, Rory.
It is. I'd like to start off this section with a short story from my teaching days. I remember teaching a level 2 class many years ago. Lovely group. And if you are one of that group, lovely group, level 2 group. And I remember talking about unconditional positive regard, which of course was one of Roger's necessary and sufficient conditions that he outlined in the 1957 Journal of Consulting Psychology, that groundbreaking journal he published about clinicians being more human, more connected, that set the tone for up till the work we do today. And I said, sometimes it could be quite difficult for people to develop a non-judgmental attitude. And somebody in the group said, I'm non-judgmental and wax lyrical. And to be fair, the person was a lovely, lovely, lovely person who'd had a very difficult life and was helping others in their life difficulties. And it was 2008, just at the time of the banking crisis. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to set you a little task here. You're working maybe with a therapist with someone who's a merchant banker who is now earning considerably less than they were 2 years ago. And they cannot afford their new Porsche sports car. And they've come to you because they're feeling they can't keep up with their friends. And there was uproar. Bankers ruining the economy and they destroyed the economy and this and that. And I just sat and watched. And eventually these bemused faces realized what I'd done. Of course, I'd given them a scenario where I knew that they may find the particular pastiche of a person I presented was unacceptable. And it gave them food for thought. Sometimes, we have stereotypes of people and we judge on those stereotypes.
Indeed. And I think if we're looking at the topic of unconditional positive regard, being non-judgmental within a relationship, I think it starts with us looking at self, because the judgment starts from within and is projected outward. It's interesting, Rory, when you were speaking through that scenario, the word you used were them bankers, and that is a great indicator that there is a prejudging, a prejudice that is held toward, as soon as any person or group of people has a label that puts them within another group, them bankers. It's like this group of bankers that maybe the frustration is focused on. But it's about coming back to our own self-concept. Who are we? And I graduated as a therapist many moons ago, Rory, and I've been in practice for many moons and in training for many moons. I've taught, been a supervisor, and I can happily say today that I hold judgments. I do, because of who I am, how I grew up, the road I traveled. And I think that I would be lying to myself if I said, I've gone past all of that. I've transcended judgment. Just try cutting me off as I'm turning, or try taking my space in a car park before me, and then you're going to see that judgmental side of me come out. So it's not that we need to be superhuman as practitioners. It's about us understanding what our own self-concept is. What is the journey that we have traveled, recognizing where we may hold prejudice or where we may be judgmental on certain aspects, and putting that one side, putting that outside of the professionally held relationship that we share with a client. Because when we're looking at that client, in front of us is a fellow human being. And that is something that links us together. No matter who they are, no matter what job they've done, no matter what their life experience, they are a fellow human being. Even if they can't speak the same language as us, they are a fellow human being. And in that, we are connected. And in that, we can empathically recognize that each one of us walks a road, and we become a product of the road we have walked. And that may cause us to act in certain ways, to hold certain views, certain strong views, I might add. but it is a product of the road we've walked, not a badness within the person. So when we're talking about unconditional positive regard, doesn't mean we accept everything they may say or every value they may hold. No, what we do accept is their right to hold that. And the fact that they are a human and they are thinking that way, feeling that way because of a road they've walked, not because of a fault within them.
I like that. I like the idea that all our behavior is directed at our experience. And it was something that Rogers talked about, and many psychologists have alluded to. All behavior is goal directed. You know, you can meet people who've done things and you think, oh, that's awful. And then when you hear their side of the story, the deed may not be any less awful, but the road to it may give us a real indication of where that person was. I worked for a long time for a charity that rehoused offenders, people coming out of prison. Some had done some terrible, terrible things. And one of the things that I found very quickly is those people who had done terrible, terrible things were not devils with tails. They were humans just like us. It was just that part of their behavior, and in some cases, part of their personality drove them to doing terrible things, but they weren't universally terrible, if that makes any sense. It was only part of their behavior. And I learned a lot. I was there for 5 years, and I met people who, I don't want to kind of labor the point here, who'd done really terrible things. And it was really interesting after I'd worked with a few of these folk. I realized that it was just one part of them. There was a part of them. There were very few, if any, really, that were universally evil. I think that's the first thing, this idea of good and evil to exercise from us as therapists. They are absolutes that we use when we cannot find an explanation for behavior. So we just label it as it's evil. It's evil, yeah, as opposed to kind of looking at the more nuanced view of things.
It's tricky when we're speaking about unconditional positive regard, a non-judgmental view of a fellow human, because we live in a conditional world. The world is conditional. You have a status in society dependent on who you are, what your birthright is, where you're born in the world, what language you speak, what religion you follow, what car you drive, what label of clothing you wear, how much you earn, what house you live in. It's a condition. You are maybe viewed as being worth more if you have a high-paying job living in a high-income area driving a big shiny car. And it's really interesting that I think to understand unconditional positive regard, we first need to look to conditions of worth, where we're saying somebody is worth more because they match certain conditions. Again, we're looking at the person-centered theory here. Conditions of worth, an example of that, a child in school does well in a test or examination and they are praised for that. It's conditional. It's not non-conditional acceptance. Oh, you've done well. Well done. Oh, who's clever then? This is great. 3 cheers for this person who's done well. This person over here did not do quite as well in this test. You really need to pull your socks up. You need to try a little bit harder. It is a conditional world. We've grown up in this conditional world, recognizing conditions of worth, recognizing the conditions that are attached to being non-judgmental, I think is a great start in understanding unconditional positive regard, or coming from a non-judgmental place. And again, I think it all starts with self. There's not a book we can read where we can walk away and go, now I get it. Yep, that's it. It's about stripping away our own conditions of worth and recognizing them, seeing who we are, recognizing our own prejudices from the road that we have walked. And there's some great questions that are in the handout that Rory has provided for us today. Now, if you want to get this handout, it's on unconditional positive regard, non-judgmental being within a counseling relationship. And you can get that by going to counselingtutor.com, click on the podcasts tab, find episode 201, and it's right there on the page. You can download that. And this exercise is an exercise in exploring some of your own attitudes, your own values, and your own qualities. And I'm going to now give you just 10 quick questions. And of course, these questions are on that handout, so go and get it. One thing I like about myself is. Now, that's an interesting one, Rory, because I think if you put that out as an exercise to a group of people and said 2 columns, one column, the things you don't like about yourself, the other column, the things you like about yourself. I wonder which column people would start with first. I column would outweigh the other.
I think it's a bit of form. I think it's a bit of former rather than the latter.
Yeah.
And I think if you put another column in next to that, where it said the things I don't like about myself, if you put a column in saying, are the things you don't like about yourself things that you've been told about yourself from others, that column would fill up pretty quickly as well, because we do get our views of ourselves from others, especially as children.
Definitely. So that's the one. The next one is one thing others like about me is, and that's an interesting one, because that is going into the frame of reference of another, what people might have told you. And then how is that accepted? If somebody says, oh, you're really good at such a thing, do you deflect that and go, oh, no, not really, ha, 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 and dodge that? Or do you accept that and go, wow, thank you, I accept that, I embrace that? Number 3, what I dislike in others is, this is a daring to be congruent and honest and put it down. You know, you started this topic, Rory, speaking about maybe those in the beginning of their journey into counseling, when faced with unconditional positive regard, going, I accept other people, I'm fully accepting. I think it takes some personal development to sit down and write what I dislike in others is being truthful and accepting that part of self that is maybe unacceptable even to self. Number 4 is what others dislike about me. Maybe an easier question to answer. What does that bring up for you? Number 5, I am really pleased with myself when ... What pleases you? What is it that when you have completed a certain thing or something happens that you go, yes, yes, it lights you up and it brings that warmth? One thing I'd like to change is, and that's an interesting one. That's number 6. One thing I'd like to change. What would be that one thing? And that's looking at self. That's really accepting self. Number 7, one thing I cannot cope with very well is, that's a good one. One thing I do very well is, one way I show I care for others is, that is number 9. And number 10, I really give myself a hard time when. When do you, listening to this, give yourself a hard time? I know I do. I'll be driving along, giving myself a hard time. I give myself hard times about things that happened decades ago. Something I might have said to someone years ago. I'll give myself a hard time today. And I don't remember the book, Rory, but I remember reading this in a book where it suggested that humans are the only animal, if we look at ourselves as biologically as an animal, the only animal that punishes itself again and again and again and again for the same act. Any other animal, the act, the punishment is there, and that's it. It's gone. It's move on. I give myself a hard time when.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is part of forming a non-judgmental attitude. You know, if you can forgive yourself, if you can find self-forgiveness, then it's got to be easier to be able to accept others. But, you know, when you can say, well, look, you know, I've done that. I made him. We all make mistakes. I make hundreds of them. And when you can forgive yourself and say, well, you know, I'm only human, then I think it becomes easier then to transpose that attitude onto somebody else. But you're absolutely right, Ken. This idea that we are universally non-judgmental, I think, is a misnomer. We do make judgments. You want to sit in my car, and I drive to a tea room. You know, I can make hundreds of them on other people's driving because, of course, I'm an expert in driving. Not
Self-elected.
Yes, self-elected expert, and we have to be forgiving of ourselves. But you bring up some interesting things. Certainly, when you talk about self-praise and self-congratulation, tends to be something that people feel very difficult about, praising themselves. And of course, praising and certainly prizing is the basis of unconditional positive regard. Prizing that person in front of you as another human being. And as you know, as Martin Buber famously said, the philosopher, it's about the I and thou relationship. Not I and it, I and thou, me and you. And here is you, and there you are. And I think it can be an interesting journey as we begin to accept ourselves. We become, I think by default, we become more accepting of others.
It's paradoxical in that being unconditionally regarding someone else and non-judgmental of someone else, we can't even begin to consider that before we look to ourselves. Can we reflect that same non-judgmental attitude towards ourselves? Can we look back at our past mistakes, our transgressions, our regrets, and go, I'm only human. I did that because of the road I walked, because of the situation I was in at that time, and look at it with unconditional positive regard and self-love, because that is the basis, that is the seed for giving that to others. I think this is an incredible topic. Really get that handout. It is truly worth it. counselingtutor.com podcast tab, episode 201. Go and download that handout. This has been a visit to the Counseling Foundations.